Hey everybody, Dr. Tom Moorcroft here with you again for this episode of the Healing from Lyme Disease Summit. And today, what a special guest. We have Dr. Hizer Сэндисон. She's a near dear friend, someone I've gotten to really get to know closely because our paths overlap so much. We started, talking because of her experience with brain health and recovering from Alzheimer's. And so many of the things that she talked about, from recovering from Alzheimer's and other dementias and brain issues, really kind of just went back to the desire to prevent it from becoming a problem in the beginning and having early interventions. And a lot of the things that can help your long-term brain health can also help you right now if you're suffering from brain fog, executive function issues, cognitive decline from tick-borne illness, mold illness. And so I wanted to have Hizer come on and really share her wisdom. So Dr. Hizer Сэндисон, thanks for joining us.
Tom, such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And so we were talking about Lyme disease and brain health, but one of the big things I always think that people would love to know is like, yeah, we're pals and everything, but what is the backstory that got to the point where we struck up these conversations about brain health? What really got you interested in it, and kind of what was your journey in brain health and healing?
Right. Yeah. So I kind of thought through medical school and stuff, like the brain was just this complex thing that was like way too hard. And I wasn't smart enough to be that kind of doctor. Like, I'm not going to be a neurologist or somebody who's that smart. And yet there was also this piece that was like a challenge of like, if you can help people who have Lyme or autism or Alzheimer's, like, man, everything else is a walk in the park. And so I was curious and interested about it and wanted to learn more, even if my confidence wasn't that high. I was like, all right, well, let me see, because there are patients like my mentor, Neil Nathan, he treats a lot of Lyme and mold. And he and I share an experience of like everyone who walks in my door, everyone who picks up the phone and calls to schedule an appointment with me, I want to be able to help them. Right? Like, that's why I'm a doctor. And so even these really challenging cases, if we can figure out some nuance or something, if we can really see that person, really hear that person and reduce their suffering at some level, that is a worthwhile endeavor for me. And so even though I didn't have a ton of confidence, I went into more and more training around Alzheimer's, hoping to just do that, to reduce the suffering associated with those chronic diseases. And what I found astounded me and gave me so much hope, and essentially gets me out of bed every morning. I've watched miracles happen, Tom, and I know I've shared these stories with you of just watching patients absolutely transform. I have a new one because I see them every week. This last week I had the son and a mother. The mother has dementia, and she had a MoCA score of 6. So the perfect score is 30. Normal cognitive function is 26 and above. And it's a one-page worksheet where you draw a clock and you copy a box and you name some zoo animals. And she had a score of 6. And 10 months later, she had a score of 13. And she just more than doubled her score. The neurologist was like, no, that's not possible. And there's nothing you can do. And this is normal age-related, dementia. Meanwhile, her son is like, I have my mom back. I can have a conversation with her. She has conversations with people at the grocery store, and she's going to the senior center, and she's happy and engaged. He's like, the only thing is she doesn't remember everything every day. And she asked questions a couple times, but he was telling me how she can go into the kitchen, get out the carrot peeler, get a carrot, peel the carrot, wash the carrot peeler, or put it in the dishwasher. Like, she knows where everything is. She can participate in making dinner. Whereas before, she didn't have the capacity to do that. And she's got it back. And those types of stories, those types of interactions, hearing, I've got my mom back, those are the things that make me really excited to do this work and share what we found. And of course, it relates to Lyme disease.
Right. Well, it's amazing when for people to understand, literally what I was trained is that is not possible. I mean, we give you meds, we slow it down, but I think it's because we're not looking at the root cause, and when that's like 100% improvement in brain function in 10 months. That's ridiculous.
With severe Alzheimer's. We're not talking about, oh, I can't remember where I put my keys. We are talking wasn't able to live independently anymore, severe disease, diagnosed Alzheimer's. And it was reversed.
It's wild because like, I'm thinking about like, to just comprehend that like a 26, 27 to 30 is normal. And like, literally like for most of us listening who have severe cognitive dysfunction and brain fog, you would still get a 25 to a 28 on your MOCA. Like it's like I remember like, and I've talked to you about this before, like my father died about 5 or so years ago now, but part of his process was, in the no longer smoking and drinking world, it led to a lot of, unfortunately years and years of wear and tear, led to the cardiovascular stuff, which led to the strokes, which led to the dementia. But he would literally brush his teeth for 2-3 hours. He's bleeding in the sink. He'd shave to the point we got him electric shaver and he'd still come out looking like a raspberry. I mean, but he would yell at you to try to stop him because like mom was telling me to tell him to stop. I'm like, he couldn't understand that in the mirror, like his face was bleeding.
Right.
Right. And so we're talking severe cognitive impairment, and you're like completely changing it. So, but then you said this interesting thing. It's like kind of related to Lyme disease, maybe. So what is sort of where does Lyme and other infections kind of come into this sort of cognitive world, and what are we seeing?
Right. So Lyme is a spirochete, right? Like in one of its forms, at least, is a spirochete. And so we can draw a lot of parallels with syphilis, which is another bacterial spirochete. And the reason that I point to syphilis is a sexually transmitted disease, very easily treated with antibiotics, right? And some people have heard of Tuskegee. That was a big part of why internal review boards, and there's a lot more protection for participants of human research subjects, is because of kind of a lot of this research we have around syphilis. And now syphilis is sort of a thing of the past. Very few people get it. If you do, it's just quick and easy to get rid of. But we have a bunch of research that tells us about what happens to people's brains when there is a spirochete involved. And so neurosyphilis is what it was called. And now there's this neuro-Lyme, there are a lot of parallels between this. And neuro-Lyme, the most common the most common symptom of Lyme, of Borrelia, is fatigue and brain fog. And fatigue and brain fog, they just come together, right? If your brain only takes up 2% of your body weight, but it takes up 20% of your energy every single day, more than that for most people. And if we don't have enough energy, our brain is not going to find that word or be able to go through that executive functioning process of planning a meal and cooking a meal and eating that meal and then cleaning up the kitchen, right? We just don't have capacity for it. And then now we don't have the nutrients, right? So you can see how there's this downward spiral, and then now we don't get exercise, and then now we're not getting sleep. And now all of a sudden our brain is just not set up for success, right? We're not doing the things that are going to support good, healthy cognitive function and mood. And so Lyme directly impacts the brain through this sort of neuro-Lyme that spirochete can get into the brain. And we even see on histology, so an autopsy, people who have dementia, many of them will have herpes or P. gingivalis, or those Lyme spirochetes show up in the brain. And it's often associated with beta amyloid plaques or tau proteins. Beta amyloid plaques in particular are known to be antimicrobial. So they're misfolded proteins that are associated, right? We equate amyloid plaques with Alzheimer's disease. And yet they're not the cause. They're a response to some other trigger of inflammation. And in fact, they're there to protect you from that other thing triggering inflammation, which is in many cases, in some cases, certainly is an infection, one of which can be Lyme. And so I believe in aggressively treating any sort of positive Lyme. There's this whole continuum of people's symptoms, and there are people who are particularly susceptible and sensitive to having those infections present. However, if anyone is complaining of brain fog or cognitive decline, I am testing every single one of them for Lyme and treating it aggressively. And as you and I have discussed before, just even compared to 5 years ago, my confidence in things like cryptolepis from the literature, but also from my clinical experience, has gone way up in terms of how we treat and the risk associated with what we use to treat. So if we're talking IV antibiotics, obviously the risk and the cost is much higher than if we're using something like a cryptolepis tincture for a year or two.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because it's nice to hear like brain recovery experts, people who are reversing Alzheimer's, are telling us, hey, we don't always just need to go for the IV antibiotics. Some people need them, but a lot of times we need to treat the infections with the best science and the best clinical experience, and not just go for a label. So I'm always excited when we can kind of like, highlight that, because people are reversing brain everybody. So one other piece that comes up a lot, and is like, everybody's like, I need this because it needs to penetrate the blood-brain barrier. Or I have Lyme in my brain, which you did summarize that you can have Lyme in your brain. But are there ways, or have you seen where people are like, have like systemic infections, maybe Lyme's, and again, it's kind of hard to find out if it's really truly in the brain or not without autopsy. So we're not going to do that on somebody who's alive, obviously. But do you see situations where even more systemic and not directly in the brain infections or other toxins could be leading to neurologic symptoms? Or is it like that we have to have the infection in the brain?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. There's so many directions we could go here, but let's stick with infections for now, because P. gingivalis directly associated, and several other of the microbes that live in the mouth and cause gingivitis directly trigger inflammation in the brain and lead to dementia, or certainly to misfolded proteins, including beta amyloid plaques. So having good oral hygiene, and this also increases inflammation in the circulatory system, so in that cardiovascular system, and can lead, so strokes are associated with a dental cleaning. This is part of why, if you have an artificial joint like a knee or a hip or something, they'll put you on prophylactic antibiotics before you go in for a dental cleaning or any sort of dental work, because if you introduce those P. gingivalis or some of the other microbes in the mouth that are associated with cardiovascular risk, or an inflammation, you can trigger a stroke, or you can trigger a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. And so, and also, of course, the reason they do it if you have an artificial valve or an artificial joint is because you can trigger and create an infection in those areas. It's a hard place to get rid of them if you start introducing bacteria directly into the bloodstream. And so this is high risk, and we know this. We know that vascular spasms are more likely to happen after those inflammatory microbes are introduced into the bloodstream. And then a stroke, right? A stroke, like as you just mentioned with your dad, a stroke can lead to dementia. You're not getting blood flow to certain parts of the brain, so parts of the brain shut down because they become just nonsensical, right? Like they're not getting blood flow, they die, those cells die. And you have to work really, really, really hard to get that back, to create new neurons or new pathways. And as we age, that gets harder and harder. And so we want to avoid that. And the best way to do it is with good oral hygiene. And I ask people to avoid getting root canals. If you need to, having teeth extracted, I think in some cases, see a biological dentist. Now, I'm not a dentist, and everybody's situation is different. But for the most part, you want to avoid root canals. Make sure if you've had your wisdom teeth extracted that there aren't cavitations there, that you don't have a lot of mercury fillings in your mouth, because that kind of is a segue into the toxic conversation. So we'll come back to that. But your dental health starts in the gut, and your gut starts in your mouth. And so I highly recommend that people have a biological dentist on their team to protect their cardiovascular health and their brain health. They are directly related. And then the other infection that I see, that we see from the literature that is associated with dementia and cognitive decline, is herpes. So this is HSV 1 and 2. This can be oral or genital, and you can have one in one spot or the other in the other. It's like not really, you can't really separate them that much. Many people test positive, especially IgG. So this it's not really a test you can do that's going to give you meaningful information here. It's more, is your experience that you have recurrent herpetic outbreaks? So some people, it's not necessarily sexually transmitted, right? You pick this up in grade school from sharing a can of soda with somebody on the playground, right? And now you get a little cold sore every time you go to the dentist, or every time you eat too many nuts, or every time you get too much sun. if you are in that category of people who gets those recurrent cold sores wherever, or herpes outbreaks wherever they show up, sometimes it's on somebody's shoulder, it's on their butt, it's not actually genital, but they show up regularly, typically in the same spot. And my recommendation, I'm a naturopath, like I'm not quick to jump to medications, but my recommendation is to treat aggressively with either acyclovir or valcyclovir. And there's different ways to do that, to work with a provider, but you want to, some people I see and they're like, I really don't want to take medications. That's part of why I'm coming to see a naturopath. What else can I do? And certainly lysine and even lithium and Melissa officinalis or lemon balm, like there are combination products that are wonderful, and maybe using those for prevention. But if you start having the prodrome, like that tingle that there's going to be an outbreak, I recommend just go straight to those antiviral medications, get on them and treat aggressively. We see this, it comes out of the epidemiological data out of Taiwan with big groups of people, where those who had herpes and they didn't treat aggressively were more likely to get dementia than those who were on the medications for antiviral support.
It's crazy. It's like, it's sort of like a lot of us have been talking forever. It's like, it is about infectious load. It's about toxin burden. And so we're finding that things that aren't maybe directly in the brain are still through the inflammatory pathways affecting it.
Without a doubt, right? And you can create these cytokine storms. This is sort of a kitchen table nomenclature now because of COVID, the cytokine storm, this idea that there's this self-perpetuating cycle of cytokine production, and cytokines are essentially the products of inflammation. And so sometimes we need to interrupt that pattern, but certainly getting rid of whatever is triggering it, whatever is telling those cells to degranulate and create more cytokines. We want to stop that signal from being sent. And sometimes we need to get rid of the inflammation. And one of the best ways to do that is through just detoxification. Having a bowel movement every day, drinking plenty of water and urinating and sweating, moving, using exercise to move the lymphatics, doing breath work, detox breath work to just reduce that toxic burden. Many of these infections that we're talking about, as you go in to kill them, they will release more toxins. And in that process, now our toxic level is going up. Now there's more cytokines, more inflammation. And so we want to be gentle with ourselves and do this at a pace that makes sense, where we're not triggering even more symptom, but we're actually staying right below that threshold where we're making progress, but not making things worse in the meantime.
Yeah. I think it's so important though to really highlight like the detoxification piece of it. And one of the things that I love talking about is the glymphatic system, the detox of the brain. And you're like, hey, this amyloid. Well, I think that like inflammation and amyloid as sort of like, there are things that get this negative rap, and inflammation is actually really good for healing as long as it turns off. And amyloid is, like you said, like it's antimicrobial and it allows the brain to heal as long as we turn it off and get rid of it. And what's really interesting to me with lymphatics and the brain detox is the number one time the lymphatic system is the primary tool the brain uses to remove amyloid plaque from the substance of the brain, or amyloid, but the thing, what you need to do is like, you actually need to sleep. This is like the primary place where your brain detoxifies. And then you're talking about, hey, let's move and have a bowel movement and let's do breath work and relax and calm down. Oh, these are all the things that if you do them during the day, actually allow you to sleep at night. So it's kind of,
I'm so glad you said that, because I've been having that conversation just this morning. It's like, if you wanted to start one place for brain health, sleep. And you mentioned beta amyloid plaques. So, and the lymphatics, getting them out, they have measured that people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who have sleep deprivation, less than 5 hours of sleep in a night, when they wake up, they have a significant accumulation of beta amyloid plaques compared to if they had slept a full 8 hours. So you can imagine that if you extend that accumulation of amyloid plaques over the course of years or decades, you're going to have an increased risk of dementia. You have protein misfolding that's accumulating, and your brain is going to stop working eventually. But we have full control of that. That variable we can control. We can get to bed. We can, and I use an Oura ring. I love it. I like getting the data. I like noticing like what changes if I, sleep in a different bed. I'm traveling. or I eat, close to bed, or I have caffeine that day versus not. All of these things are kind of fun. You can be in an N of 1 trial for yourself, do these experiments on yourself, and then get that direct feedback about my experience. How rested do I feel? How good was my sleep when I change up these variables? And know that when you're getting better sleep, you are doing your brain a huge favor and reducing the risk of that amyloid plaque formation and buildup. The other thing is, of course, this is better for your immune system to get good, healthy sleep. It's such a great starting point when affecting brain health, because if you can get that good sleep, then now you have a little bit more willpower, a little more bandwidth to make those good, healthy food decisions. Now you have more energy to exercise. Now you get on that virtuous cycle of making good, healthy decisions, because really our health comes down to those decisions that feel small, but that we make consistently every day about what we eat, what time we go to bed, whether or not we brush and floss our teeth, right? Those little decisions, how much exercise we get, how many people that we connect with. Those decisions, that sum total of those decisions is what ends up being our health.
I mean, I'm just, shaking my head over here and going like this, because it's like, yes, it's so critical. And what's interesting is like, I love looking at, I'm a picture person. I love data. So I love looking at like PET scans of brains. And it's like, it is amazing the difference between if you sleep 7 to 8 hours versus less than 6 hours, the amount of rapid accumulation of amyloid beta that happens in your brain. And just recently, so I think about a lot of like I did this lecture years and years ago about chronic bonking. I got asked to talk about nutrition at a Lyme conference. And I said, look, bonking is a term that we use in athletics where you basically blow out your energy supply and you're like killing it in your marathon or your cycling event, and then you hit the wall. And then it's like, even if you get a bunch of food, you're out for days. Like you are so washed out. And I said, one of the things that our Lyme patients are doing is they're chronically bonking. Their insulin and their blood glucose are all over the place. Their nutrients are all over the place, up and down. And even when they're really trying, it's like they're chronically running a marathon. And then I told people these strategies of how to do it. And it was like crickets. It wasn't until it was like literally like the worst rated lecture I ever did. And it was the most lackluster response until about 3 years later at the same conference, when like at least 15 people came up to me and said, I thought that was another boring nutrition lecture for about 2 years. And then I got it. And they got it because it was simple. And this is one of the things I love about what you're saying, Heather, is there's so many little simple things that if you do consistently will make a difference. And sleep, just recently, we did a Lyme retreat that we do once a year for practitioners. And we do a lot of activities during the day because many of us have overcome our health challenges. Now we live what we preach to our patients. And the thing we noticed was I started to get tired. I'm running the event. I'm lecturing at the event. We're exercising and skiing during the day. There may or may not have been a little bit of adult partying in the evenings while you're talking, because it's kind of like our vacation. But at the end of it, I was like, I needed 3 days of 9 hours of sleep a night. But I was like flashing back and having such a positive feeling when you were describing everything, because when I got there, I did it the first morning. I woke up, I was like, I'm a little tired, but I feel so clean. I feel so good. And I was able to get back on the bandwagon of high cognitive stuff after I was feeling emotionally kind of behind the 8 ball. And then I did it again and I got like 8.5 hours, like, oh, I need another 30 minutes. So the next night I got my full 9 as my catch up, and my brain was like back on track. Right. But this is literally just a couple of days of a little bit of burning the candle. I still got like 7.5, 8 hours every night. But when I stressed my system more, I needed a little more.
Well, we've all experienced jet lag, right? Your brain doesn't work when you're on a time zone half a world away. It just doesn't, it's so hard to function. And I think that that's one of the best illustrations, right? Because so many people can go back to that time, like, oh yeah, I took that work trip and I like could barely make it through the conference, or
yes,
I barely got anything out of it. I can't even remember it, because we were stretched so much. We were stressed, and sleep was so disrupted. And it is just one of those critical components to health. And yeah, when we're young, we can get away with it and we can kind of bounce back. But when we accumulate that, when we make a habit out of it, when it becomes kind of our work, or we see this a lot with caregivers. So people who are caring for Alzheimer's patients are anywhere from 250 to 600% higher risk for being diagnosed with Alzheimer's later in life. The highest risk is a male spouse of someone with dementia. And so the rates of later diagnosis are very, very high. The risk of caregiving, very, very high. And we think a lot of this is because of these modifiable risk factors when it comes to dementia, including sleep deprivation, social isolation, poor dietary choices, sedentary lifestyle, all of these things, potentially smoking, because you got to get your stress out somewhere, right? And so all of these things start to be stacked on top of each other, and they create a downward spiral instead of a virtuous cycle. And so it's one of the first conversations I have whenever a couple shows up in my office, even when it's an adult child, sometimes like the son and mom I was describing. I speak directly to the care partner and say, hey, like, you must take care of yourself. Put your oxygen mask on first, because if you are not sleeping, if you are not exercising, if you are not eating well, if you're not taking time for yourself, then you are going to become the patient. And you're not helping your mom or your spouse anymore. You actually put them at risk. And so you have an obligation to take care of yourself, and treat the Lyme, treat the infections, go to the dentist. I know it's one of those things as a caregiver, parents experience this, but parents, as a parent, there's your child is getting more independent. They've never been an adult who expects independence and decision-making and authority and wants to be able to drive, right? It's your job as a parent to say no and create boundaries. Now, when the roles reverse and you are caring for an elderly parent who has dementia, you don't know how long it's going to last. They're large. They weigh more than 120 pounds. And you can't force them into bed. It's such a different dynamic that creates so much more stress. And so it reduces immune function, right? All of these risk factors start to accumulate. And so really putting that emphasis, I think, is so important to the societal picture around Alzheimer's, just sort of draining us of that wisdom and experience of our elders.
Hey, I just was like flashing back, like my mother, we had a family meeting 2 months before my dad passed, where we were going to have an intervention because my mom was cognitively losing it, emotionally losing it. She's a slight woman. She had lost like 20 pounds, and she's probably started at 118 pounds, and she's down, you've seen this. I can see it on your face, right? It's like, so what's really interesting was once my dad passed, my mom focused on her own health, and the diet kills me. This just dawned on me while you were saying this, Heather. My dad had really bad kidney disease. And so once your kidneys are shot, they put you on this diet that's horrible for everybody except the person with end stage kidney disease. And my mom did the diet with him so that he would do it, and it destroyed her health. And so if we rewind or sidestep or whatever, and we put this in the perspective of caregivers and family members and even patients with Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, maybe even mold or some combination of this, is putting your oxygen mask on first, putting yourself first, leading the other people in your family by example, because in Lyme, the good diet for Lyme is the good diet for life, right? End stage renal failure, different story. But it's really like what you're saying is so true. And it's not just for dementia, it's for dementia prevention. It's for cognitive function or decline of cognitive function reversal. Even if you're talking about a child who's 6 years old, or you're 26, or you're 36 or 56, all this information is like the way you live a healthy lifestyle. And one of the things that like we always seem to talk about a lot and is how you can live a lifestyle now that prevents it. Because I remember a previous conversation we had is like, hey, the best outcomes are those who take action early, not late.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's fun about this, and as you're sort of alluding to, is I see CEOs, highly successful, at the top of their game, looking to optimize cognitive function. Athletes like that, And then I see people who are terrified. They're going to have dementia like their mom, who's already passed, but they went through that torture of caring for her, and they don't want their kids to be put in that position. And that's such a luxury to be working with people on prevention and optimization. And then we see people with more early stage dementia, and that's like a MoCA. Again, this MoCA score kind of gives us a spectrum of where you are on that cognitive decline path. And if there's a MoCA in the 20s, it's measurable cognitive decline, but not that bad yet. I'm like, that's in the bag. We got this. Like, as long as you're willing to do the work, we can do this. And then we see people that are quite severe, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them we see improve. Now, they don't go back to work. They don't get to a MoCA of 30, but over time they get better, and they continue to get better 3 and 4 and 5 years later. They're still getting better. And now the advice I give that entire spectrum of people is more or less the same.
Mm-hmm.
Ketogenic diet, treat those infections aggressively, get good sleep, optimize for less stress. Well, not always less stress, right? Optimize for the good stress, the type of stress that you're curious about. Like, stress your system with new recipes and new diets and learn new music, create new relationships, learn a new card game, go ballroom dancing. Like, those are the stressors. We don't want you to sit on the couch and veg out, but we don't want you under this type of stress of like legal matters and, financial issues.
What's the next best treatment for my Lyme or mold? Join up with someone like Dr. Сэндисон or myself to actually get that guidance, and then let us do it for you so you can stress about cool stuff like your latest, greatest diet. Like, I love all this.
And so many people, we need handholding. Like, the information is out there, you get it. But get a coach or work with a provider who can hold your hand through the process, because it's hard. It's not easy, but there is hope, right? You can do this, and it's not going to be for everyone, but for anyone that's willing to do the work, it's possible. You can reverse dementia and you can heal from Lyme.
I love it. So, Dr. Hizer Сэндиson, I mean, I want to talk all day long, because like, this is so important, but I really just want to put a huge punctuation on the last statement you made. And everyone, I want you to rewind and listen to the last 30 seconds over and over and over, because you can prevent decline. You can reverse decline. You can heal from Alzheimer's. You can heal from Lyme. But notice that I use the word you in every single one of these. And in my personal healing journey, as I've told you so many times, 70 to 80% of my healing was me. I needed a little help from the provider, but I was ready to do the work because I was already doing the work. And my body was ready to accept the healing because I was already optimizing everything I could on my own. This is the whole summit is about how you can heal from Lyme disease and come out of it on the tail end better than you ever thought you could be, so that you can go live your best life and shine your light for the world. And that's why, Heather, I'm so honored and blessed to have you here to share all this hope with people. Because when I think about it, it's like, when I go to, who do I think about who can actually fix and repair cognitive function? It's like, this is the holy grail, and you're doing this all the time in all your different things. So I just want to say thank you for sharing your love and your heart with everyone and your knowledge.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's such a pleasure always to catch up with you. And, Lyme is one of those things too, just like dementia, where people feel hopeless many, many times, and often have been to many, many providers and feel like they're just banging their head against the wall, not getting the help that they deserve and need. And so this summit, I'm just so grateful to be a part of it and honored to be a part of it, and just spread that message of hope that there are things that you can do.
Yeah.
And you are a testament, living testament to that.
Oh my gosh. Right. And every once in a while, I'm like, I don't want to be a statistic, but I love being that statistic where I break the mold, and but many, many people are doing this. So one of the things, we didn't even get into all the amazing things you're doing in residential dementia recovery and all your other group programs. So I'm sure that after hearing all this, everyone's going to want more of Dr. Heather and know how to engage with you a little bit more, so that they can learn even more from all these little things that we just barely touched on. So where can people reach out to you and learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. So drheathersanderson.com is a great place to start. And from there, there's Solcere. Solcere, SOLCERE, is my clinic here in San Diego, California. And that's where we treat people one-on-one for dementia. So Solcere is kind of like shining light, like the sun, soul, or solutions for the brain, the cerebrum. And so Solcere, SOLCERE.com, or Marama Experience, MARAMA, maramaexperience.com, is where you can learn more about our residential care programs. And Marama at Home, MARAMA at home.com, is where you can learn how to implement these practices from the comfort of your own home so that you never need a memory care facility or residential care facility like Marama, which is really my goal, to make Alzheimer's rare and optional so that you never have to go down that path of losing your dignity and of losing your minds.
I love that. That might be my new goal for Lyme disease and co-infections. We're going to make them rare and optional. I love it. So good, Heather. So thank you so much. And everyone, I mean, like, Heather is like at the forefront of all the research, all the actual clinical trials that are showing that everything we talked about today is true, yet can show up and speak like just common language and share from the heart and inspire. I'm so inspired. And like every time we talk, I'm like, I got to make sure I do this thing and that thing in my life, because it's like we all want to make sure we're keeping those really great habits. So thank you for being an inspiration and sharing with everyone. And definitely everybody, I will make sure that on our Summit resource page, we have all the links to Dr. Sandison's work. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Heather Sandison. And
thank you, Tom. Such a pleasure always.
And everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Healing from Lyme Disease Summit. I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next interview, and just take some of this stuff that we talked about, pick one thing and put it into action. And, over a couple weeks and a couple months, you'll start to see it working. And really, we just want to give you back your own healing power, because it's never gone anywhere. Maybe the people out in the media have suggested that you don't own it anymore, but you truly own the vast majority of all your healing potentials. So take this information that Dr. Heather Sandison has shared and implement that in your lives. And please reach out and let us know how it's working. Until next time, I'm Dr. Tom Moorcroft. Great to see you.